So the dice have fallen and the meme gods have chosen the candidate they will support in the 2020 US presidential election. And I have to say, I am very happy with their choice. Yes, the God Emperor Trump memes were sort of amusing at the time, but Yang Gang already has way superior meme game. And it's gonna be very funny seeing the right wing pathetically trot out stale Trump train memes this election cycle. But the thing I personally find much more important is that Andrew Yang would actually be someone I could see myself supporting. I mean, never mind the fact that he actually is a successful entrepreneur who didn't come from massive amounts of money already. Never mind the fact that he actually knows how business works, as demonstrated by the fact that he has taken a lot of startups, stomped them out of the ground and built them into successful companies, which is basically the opposite of what Donald Trump did. Andrew Yang just has very good policy positions across the board. I don't think he has the best policy positions, but they're very good. He understands that small and medium-sized businesses are the real backbone of the economy, and he understands how technology can endanger them and make them thrive. And to him, that's not just an empty platitude that he spits out in public, while in reality supporting massive mega corporations that he's all lubed up for in the behind. He actually has very concrete policy positions that'll make these small and medium-sized businesses work better and empower the average American as an economic actor through the power of capitalism. He wants to root out government corruption, build infrastructure, simplify taxes, give free financial counseling to all Americans. Basically, the idea behind that is that he will expand the IRS to have a sort of department that helps average Americans make more money. He understands that new technologies need to be implemented for the people and not just for the oligarchs. And he also understands that the number one threat to jobs, not just in America, but really anywhere in the world, is automation. He wants to support higher education, making all Americans capable of making better economic and financial decisions. Which is a huge problem, of course, in America, because most of the system is built into educating people so they will make bad financial decisions, so their money that they worked hard for can go to the very top, because it's all a pyramid scheme, and those people will then also continue voting against their own best economic interests. You know, like libertarianism. There's really just one reason why the Yang Gang is in the house tonight. It's $1,000! That's his big thing, making every single American into a more powerful economic actor, allowing them to have more financial security and giving them the ability to spend more money on the economy. I've done a lot of videos on UBI, you know I'm an advocate for it, I will link them down below. It does not in fact increase inflation, because that's not how inflation works. It does not discourage people from working, because that's not the only reason people go to work. This is all backed up by numerous studies. We know this at this point. Do go watch the other videos. One of the things I do like to see UBI as is basically a subsidy for the entire country. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do like the idea of government subsidies going to organizations and corporations that develop new technologies which are important to the future beyond just economic concerns. But a lot of bogus subsidies also just go to billion-dollar corporations. There's fossil fuel subsidies still in the United States. Those are a thing. What if instead you subsidize the population of a country, allow them to lead better lives, allow them to contribute more money to the economy that is actually backed by production and not just numbers on a virtual computer system? Because as any serious economist will tell you, if you give $1 to a random person, just any person you meet on the street, that dollar will do more work in the economy facilitating transactions of goods and services than that same dollar just given to a billion-dollar corporation. Andrew Yang wants to give average Americans the ability to engage in wealth building, and not the kind of wealth building that is currently common and popular in America, the kind of "you will be a billionaire in 2 years" kind of wealth building, because that's a pyramid scheme. Stop falling for that shit. Jesus Christ. He wants the economy to be driven by the average person and not billionaire sociopaths and smoke-filled back rooms. It is a well-known fact that it is as difficult to get out of poverty to a place where you no longer have to live paycheck to paycheck as it is to get from like a solid middle class position into phenomenal wealth. And what Andrew Yang and a lot of other incredibly smart economists and scholars and policy experts want to do with UBI is to remove that same hurdle, which is very easy to remove for the government. For other people, they could easily just like that do it. It's just that the people who have nothing can't overcome that obstacle. His motto is human capitalism, because he understands that the most important resource in any given economy is not, in fact, the money, but the human capital, the skills and resources that every individual person in the labor force provides. He understands that GDP and GDP growth are not very good indicators of how an economy is doing, because they do not at all reflect how well the average person is doing. He understands that the stock market also is not a very good indicator of how an economy is doing, because it only reflects how the top 20% of an economy is doing. He also understands that unemployment isn't a very good metric to understand how an economy is doing, because he knows that you can have a full-time job and still not have enough money to feed yourself. That is a reality for a lot of people. And also, you could just have 0% unemployment if you implemented slavery and had everyone working for free. But all of that stuff has been sort of covered to death, and I want to look into some of the other more obscure policy positions that Andrew Yang brings to the table. One of the things that I find fascinating is that he has this American exchange program where he essentially encourage high school graduates, college students to sort of move to different parts of the country to see different parts of the United States of America. But why? Well, let me tell you, it's a lot more difficult for, say, a kid born in the suburbs of Seattle to think of the people living in West Virginia as inbred hillbillies if he's actually been to West Virginia and realized that they're all his fellow Americans and they're all actually pretty clever. They're just in a very different life situation and are drawn by very different economic forces. The same is true the other way around. If you grew up on a rural farm in Alabama, it becomes very difficult to see just all Californians as liberal hipster ninnies if you actually know people in California, have been there and experienced the local culture. He wants to encourage the formation of a new sense of united Americanness, because America is a culturally very rich, diverse, and divided place. And he wants fellow Americans to accept each other as fellow Americans. He wants a secondary, more difficult path to citizenship for illegal immigrants who actually contribute to the economy, which is the overwhelming majority of them. He wants them to be able to contribute more, pay proper taxes, take advantage of the systems that they are paying taxes for, and just in general draw them out of the shadows so they can be held more accountable. He has a brilliant idea on how to stifle corruption among top officials. You know how, for instance, the Clintons get paid vast sums of money just to talk to rich people, to give a speech at some conference, and that's $300K just thrown their way for 5 minutes of fucking work. That's part of the deal. Legislators and regulators are in office and they suck the corporate dick, they sell out the American people in favor of massive lobbying groups, and then when they are out of office, they get cushy lobbying jobs, or just jobs where they get money and don't really show up, or they get paid these exorbitant fees for speaking. Andrew Yang wants to make these things illegal, but at the same time, to prevent brain drain from like the top civil servants in the country, he wants to increase all of their salaries across the board. So basically, the people who are supposed to serve the American people are only accountable to the American people. He wants to implement a reasonable capital gains tax because, frankly, hard-working people who get out of bed every morning and go to their job every day shouldn't be paying more in taxes than just someone who was born rich or someone who scammed someone else and then became rich, who owns a computer that does high-speed stock trading for them. Attached to that, he wants to implement a financial transaction tax on the stock market, because the stock market at this point doesn't actually contribute much to the economy at all. It's just a huge collection of bubbles. It's highly volatile, super dangerous, it doesn't add anything, and all the risk is carried by the average taxpayer who doesn't actually gain anything from the stock market. So it's only fair that billionaires who play that game should carry some of the risk. He wants to give judges more power to sort of dismiss bogus lawsuits, because here's one of my favorite things about America. If you are a person with a lot of money, say you're a big corporation, and you see like a small startup, and they're doing something that at some point you think, oh, that could be problematic. For me, you just sue them. Just take a little bit of your money and sue them to death with it, and they will go bankrupt just from the legal fees to defend against the bogus lawsuit that was never intended to be won by you, but the company will still be wrecked. He wants to revitalize malls as community spaces, which is fascinating to me because I don't come from a place where there's malls. We learned in school that Americans go to malls on the weekend to have like community stuff, and they seem to be dying. I will at some point do a video on malls because they're just fascinating to me. He wants to relax zoning laws so high density areas can actually build affordable housing in many places, which is essential for the economy. These areas are high density because there's jobs there. But if you get to a point where people can't afford to live there anymore, or when they can't afford to spend any money outside of the rent there anymore, the economic growth in that area stalls. He supports nuclear energy over fossil fuels, which is just a correct position to hold if you understand anything about energy. At the same time, he strongly supports the Green New Deal, which is one of the best things that has entered the conversation and even the legislative conversation for decades, really, in America. It would just massively increase the number of high-paying jobs. It would be phenomenal for the environment. And this is true no matter what certain internet pundits with a huge hate boner for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would have you believe. He wants to protect net neutrality and break up the huge ISP cartels to encourage actual competition, so people in America can have fast internet for reasonable prices, which, no matter what liars would have you believe, is not at all the case. Like, I always think I have it bad in Germany, where just the taxpayer built the internet and then the government gave it to a private corporation. But just the shit internet you get, even for the exorbitant fees that you pay, and the amount of money that you have to pay for good internet in the United States, I could have a second flat from that kind of money. Here's this really interesting idea where he wants to make tax day a federal holiday and also allow every American to contribute 1% of their taxes to whatever federal program that they want to contribute that 1% to, which is just a phenomenal way of including people in the budgeting process. Very importantly, Andrew Yang wants to monitor and regulate AI research so we don't one day wake up and suddenly Silicon Valley controls the entire world, or somebody doesn't build a paperclip machine by accident. He wants to introduce a department to the FCC that holds media outlets and other news organizations accountable for spreading false information. At the same time, he wants to fund journalists and encourage real, proper journalism, especially local journalism and investigative journalism, and make it so publishers are less dependent on advertisers that might have the coverage on certain things altered because, of course, they are powerful people with powerful interests. This is one I particularly like, and I think it's particularly necessary considering many of the conversations that are being had in the United States. He wants to, for one, give better training to local police officers, but more importantly, give body cams to all police officers. And I would say give them dash cams also. Those are cheap. This amount of transparency and accountability would massively reduce police brutality practically overnight. And it would also enable police officers to do their job properly without fear of repercussions from, say, lies, because there's video evidence that if they acted according to protocol, they did act according to protocol. So there are a lot of good ideas on the Yang 2020 website, which I totally encourage you to check out, get your own opinion on it. Look into these things yourself. Very innovative, very fresh wind kind of stuff that other candidates haven't even considered. There are some things I am apprehensive about. The whole fight for equal pay thing is already, it's illegal to pay two people for the same work when they do the same work, and the gender pay gap disappears when you account for all the factors that you should be accounting for, unless you want to draw false equivalency, which is often done. But his approach seems to be to have pay grade transparency, so people who are actually being paid less than they should be compared to their colleagues, they will be able to take action and take advantage of the laws that forbid this kind of thing. He wants to modernize voting, which means he wants every American to be able to participate in voting through their mobile phones via blockchain. And he claims that this can be made 100% safe, but it can't. It just really can't. You can't have any fuckery at the back end, but there's still just a step in front of sending that vote the step on your phone, the security on your phone, that is always going to be a risk factor. Then again, the way that most of America does voting now, and really also other countries where we use exclusively paper ballots, that also isn't 100% safe. So really you have to look and see on what is more practical and what is safer than the other thing. The one thing I am really irritated by is automatic sunset clauses on all laws as a constitutional amendment. So basically all laws that pass the legislature would have to be renewed after a certain period of time, or just no longer be laws. And sunset clauses do already exist in a lot of laws, like for instance the Trump tax cuts, where the tax cuts for the very rich people are permanent, but the tax cuts for the middle class are not permanent. They will decay very quickly. But just blanket sunset clauses is very risky, because it might just bog down the entire legislative apparatus with constantly having to renew old laws instead of being able to move forward with new laws that are required. And some old laws are just very important. The red tape removing itself may sound very nice in theory, but it's not actually a very good idea in practice. I personally would instead like it so you could more easily open the books and scrap old laws that people don't need anymore, that the country doesn't require anymore, or amend them, but just automatic sunset clauses are big poo-poo. And after all this, where do I stand on Andrew Yang? I like him. He's a good candidate. He has a lot of very good ideas that'll make you, my friends across the pond, very future-proof. I don't think he's gonna win, and I don't think he should win. At least not this time around. Here's what I'd like to see. 2020, you get President Gabbard or President Sanders. Really, it doesn't matter which one. Maybe even President Warren. And then you have Andrew Yang as Secretary of the Treasury in that administration. Then he's there when they introduce Medicare for all, free college, ranked choice voting, campaign finance reform, and most importantly, taking the brunt of the tax burden away from the middle class and placing it on the people who are squeezing the middle class, meaning the rich. Basically, he would help that administration bring America into the present, so the rest of the world doesn't look down on you the way we are. They also make his Department of Technology, which is one of the things that he wants to accomplish with his campaign, and then in 2024, he becomes Secretary of Technology. Then, 2028, Andrew Yang becomes president and takes the America that is in the present, implements his policies, brings it into the future, also throughout 2032. Because even though I'm not an American, and I don't plan on ever becoming an American or spending more than just like a vacation amount of time, extended vacation amount of time in America, I do think it's very important for America to remain a global superpower and not be torn apart by corporate interests. I mean, there was a time where you sort of led by example in many ways. Not so much in other ways, but let's just ignore that for a moment. Plus, I want Americans to have good things. I like America, and I like Americans. It's a fascinating place. So while I do not think that Andrew Yang is going to win this election, I do think he is a massively important candidate. And I do look forward to all the Yang Gang memes. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the things. Post this video to your relevant communities. Do not spam them, please. I do not want that. Consider supporting me on Patreon, or maybe buying some of my merchandise. Following me on Twitter, where I literally never say anything interesting. And in that spirit, Yang Gang 2020, Yang Gang 2020, Yang Gang 2020, and see you around, cunts.